Sarah Chen had always been different from her colleagues at Morrison & Associates, one of the most prestigious law firms in downtown Seattle. While they wore perfectly pressed suits and conservative hairstyles, Sarah's arms were covered in intricate tattoos that she carefully concealed beneath long sleeves and blazers. At 28, she was one of the youngest associates at the firm, having graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Law School. But her academic achievements seemed to matter little to some of her coworkers, who had caught glimpses of her ink during casual Friday events or office parties. The whispers started almost immediately after she joined the firm 3 years ago. Margaret Williams, a senior partner in her 50s, made it clear from day one that she disapproved of Sarah's unprofessional choices. During their first meeting, Margaret's eyes had lingered disapprovingly on a small piece of artwork that peeked out from beneath Sarah's sleeve cuff. From that moment forward, Sarah made sure every inch of her tattoos remained hidden, even on the hottest summer days when the office air conditioning struggled to keep up with Seattle's unexpected heat waves. "I don't understand why someone would deliberately mark up their body like that," Sarah overheard Margaret telling another partner, James Rodriguez, during a coffee break. "It shows poor judgment and a lack of foresight. What client would want to be represented by someone who looks like they belong in a motorcycle gang rather than a courtroom?" The comments stung, but Sarah had heard worse. Growing up in a conservative household in suburban Portland, she had faced similar criticism from her parents when she got her first tattoo at 18. Her mother had cried for hours, convinced that her daughter had ruined her chances of ever having a respectable career. Her father simply shook his head in disappointment and refused to speak to her for weeks. But Sarah's tattoos weren't random impulses or rebellious statements against authority. Each piece of artwork on her body told a specific story, carried deep personal meaning, and represented a chapter of her life that had shaped who she had become. The elaborate dragon that wrapped around her left arm wasn't just decorative art. It was a tribute to her grandmother, who had raised her after her parents died in a car accident when Sarah was 12. Her grandmother, a first-generation Chinese immigrant, had often told Sarah stories about dragons being symbols of strength, wisdom, and protection in their culture. The geometric patterns that covered her right shoulder weren't just trendy designs. They were recreations of traditional Pacific Northwest Native American artwork that honored her maternal grandfather's Tlingit heritage. Sarah had spent months researching the cultural significance of each symbol, working with tribal elders to ensure she represented their traditions respectfully and accurately. The mountain range that stretched across her back wasn't just a love of nature. It was a detailed replica of the Cascade Range where she had scattered her parents' ashes according to their final wishes. Every Monday morning, Sarah would stand in front of her bedroom mirror, carefully applying concealer to any exposed skin that might reveal her tattoos. She had become an expert at layering makeup, choosing clothing styles that provided complete coverage, and positioning herself in meetings to avoid accidental exposure. The routine had become second nature, but it also served as a daily reminder that she was hiding a fundamental part of herself from the people she worked with every day. The law firm's culture was one of tradition and conservatism. The founding partners, all men in their 60s and 70s, had established unwritten rules about appearance and behavior that everyone was expected to follow without question. Women were expected to wear neutral colors, minimal jewelry, and hairstyles that could be described as businesslike. Men were required to wear ties every day, even during weekend work sessions, and facial hair was strongly discouraged. Sarah excelled at her job despite the constant pressure to conform. She had a natural talent for research and argumentation that impressed even her harshest critics. Her case preparation was meticulous. Her legal briefs were models of clarity and persuasion, and her courtroom presence commanded respect from judges and opposing counsel alike. She had won several high-profile cases for the firm, bringing in millions of dollars in settlements and establishing relationships with influential clients who specifically requested her representation. But her professional success did little to change how some of her colleagues perceived her. During office gatherings, she often found herself standing alone, while others formed tight circles of conversation that seemed deliberately exclusive. When she tried to join discussions about weekend plans or family events, the conversations would quickly shift to topics that made it clear she wasn't really welcome. The message was subtle but unmistakable. She might be a talented lawyer, but she wasn't one of them. The situation became more difficult when Sarah started dating Michael Thompson, a fellow associate who had joined the firm 6 months after her. Michael was everything the partners approved of: He came from a wealthy Connecticut family, had attended Yale Law School, and looked like he could have stepped out of a Ralph Lauren advertisement. His blonde hair was always perfectly styled. His suits were custom-tailored, and his family connections included federal judges and Fortune 500 executives. Their relationship developed slowly over late nights working on cases together. Sarah found herself drawn to Michael's intelligence and sense of humor, while he seemed genuinely interested in her insights and perspectives on legal strategy. For months, they kept their relationship private, meeting for dinner at small restaurants far from downtown Seattle, and spending weekends hiking in the mountains where they were unlikely to encounter anyone from work. When their relationship became serious enough that they wanted to make it public, Sarah faced a difficult decision. Michael had never seen her tattoos, despite the fact that they had been together for almost 8 months. She had become so skilled at concealment that even during their most intimate moments, she managed to keep her artwork hidden through strategic positioning and carefully chosen clothing. But she knew that she couldn't maintain the deception indefinitely, and she worried about how he would react when he discovered the extent of her body art. The revelation came on a Saturday morning in late spring, when they had planned to spend the day at Michael's family cabin on Lake Chelan. Sarah had packed her usual collection of long-sleeved shirts and full-coverage swimwear, but the weather forecast predicted temperatures in the low 80s, making her typical wardrobe choices impractical for outdoor activities. As she stood in Michael's bathroom applying her usual layers of concealer, she realized that the combination of heat, water, and physical activity would make it impossible to keep her tattoos hidden. When she finally emerged from the bathroom wearing a tank top that revealed the full extent of her arm tattoos, Michael's reaction was immediate and intense. His face went pale, and he stared at her arms as if he was seeing a completely different person. The silence stretched between them for what felt like hours, though it was probably only seconds, before he finally spoke. "Sarah, what is all of that?" His voice carried a tone of shock and disappointment that made her stomach drop. "I had no idea you had so many tattoos." "Why didn't you tell me?" She tried to explain the meaning behind each piece, the careful thought and cultural research that had gone into every design, but Michael seemed unable to get past his initial shock. He asked her to cover up before they left for the lake, suggesting that his family and friends wouldn't understand or approve of her appearance. The day that was supposed to be a milestone in their relationship instead became a turning point that highlighted the fundamental differences in their backgrounds and values. Word of Sarah's tattoos spread through the law firm with remarkable speed. Michael, despite promising to keep her revelation private, apparently shared the information with his closest friend at the firm, who then told his girlfriend, who worked as a paralegal in the corporate law division. Within a week, Sarah noticed subtle changes in how people interacted with her. Conversations would stop when she entered the break room, colleagues would find excuses to avoid working with her on cases, and she was conspicuously excluded from informal social events that had previously included her. Margaret Williams seemed particularly energized by the confirmation of her suspicions about Sarah's character. During a partners' meeting that Sarah was attending to present her research on a complex intellectual property case, Margaret made several pointed comments about the importance of maintaining the firm's reputation and ensuring that all employees reflected the company's values and standards. While she never mentioned Sarah by name, the subtext was clear to everyone in the room. "We have built our reputation over 40 years by maintaining the highest standards of professionalism," Margaret said, her eyes fixed on Sarah throughout her comments. "Our clients trust us not just because of our legal expertise, but because we represent stability, tradition, and sound judgment. Any behavior or appearance that undermines that trust reflects poorly on all of us." James Rodriguez, who had always been more supportive of Sarah's work, tried to redirect the conversation back to the legal issues at hand, but the damage was done. Sarah could feel the weight of judgment from around the conference table, and she realized that her carefully maintained professional facade had finally cracked beyond repair. The stress of hiding her identity while maintaining her professional responsibilities began to take a toll on Sarah's physical and mental health. She was sleeping poorly, often lying awake at night worrying about accidental exposure or planning her wardrobe for the next day. Her relationship with Michael became increasingly strained as he continued to express discomfort with her tattoos and suggested that she consider having them removed or covered with more extensive makeup. Their conversations became dominated by discussions of what others would think and how her appearance might affect his own career prospects at the firm. Sarah began to question whether she had made the right choice in pursuing a career at such a conservative firm. She had other options, including an offer from a smaller, more progressive legal practice that specialized in civil rights law. The salary would be significantly lower and the prestige factor would be minimal, but she would be able to work in an environment where her personal expression wouldn't be seen as a liability. The decision became more urgent when she learned that the firm was considering her for promotion to senior associate, a position that would come with increased client contact and greater visibility within Seattle's legal community. Margaret Williams made it clear that the promotion would require Sarah to demonstrate not just legal competence, but also the kind of judgment and professionalism that would reflect well on the firm's reputation. As Sarah sat in her apartment on a rainy Thursday evening, staring at her reflection in the bathroom mirror as she applied her nightly skincare routine, she traced the outlines of the tattoos on her arms with her fingertips. Each design held memories of important moments in her life. The day she graduated from law school, the anniversary of her parents' death, the celebration of her grandmother's 80th birthday. The artwork represented years of careful planning, thousands of dollars in investment, and countless hours spent working with talented artists to create something beautiful and meaningful. But more than that, her tattoos represented her refusal to hide the parts of her identity that others might find uncomfortable or challenging. They were visual reminders of her heritage, her experiences, and her values. Covering them felt like erasing essential parts of herself to make others more comfortable with her presence in their carefully controlled professional environment. The next morning, Sarah made a decision that would change the trajectory of her career and her life. Instead of reaching for her usual long-sleeved blouse and blazer, she selected a short-sleeved dress that revealed the intricate artwork on her arms. She skipped the concealer routine that had become such an ingrained part of her morning preparation. For the first time in 3 years, she was going to work as her authentic self, regardless of the consequences. As she walked through the law firm's marble-lined lobby, Sarah could feel the weight of stares from receptionists, security guards, and early-arriving colleagues. Her heart was pounding, but she kept her shoulders straight and her chin up as she made her way to the elevator. Today would be the day that her colleagues learned who she really was, and more importantly, it would be the day she stopped apologizing for it. The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt like the longest 2 minutes of Sarah's professional life. When the doors opened, she stepped into the familiar hallway lined with portraits of the firm's founding partners, their stern faces seeming to judge her decision to finally reveal her authentic self. The morning sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows caught the colors in her tattoos, making the artwork appear to shimmer and move as she walked toward her office. The first person to notice was Jennifer Park, a junior associate who shared Sarah's interest in environmental law. Jennifer's eyes widened when she saw the elaborate designs covering Sarah's arms, but instead of the disapproval Sarah had expected, she saw something that looked like admiration and curiosity. Jennifer approached her cautiously, as if she wasn't sure whether it was appropriate to comment on what she was seeing. "Sarah, your tattoos are absolutely beautiful," Jennifer said in a whisper, glancing around to make sure no senior partners were within hearing distance. "I had no idea you had so much artwork. The detail is incredible. Who did the work?" For the first time in months, Sarah felt a surge of pride rather than shame when discussing her tattoos. She explained how she had worked with 3 different artists over the course of several years, each specializing in different styles and cultural traditions. The dragon on her left arm had been created by a master tattoo artist in San Francisco's Chinatown, who had spent hours ensuring that every scale and whisker reflected traditional Chinese artistic techniques. The Native American designs on her right shoulder had been done by a Tlingit artist in Juneau, Alaska, who had insisted on understanding Sarah's family connection before agreeing to create the piece. As Sarah and Jennifer talked, other colleagues began to take notice. Some stared openly from a distance, their expressions ranging from shock to curiosity to obvious disapproval. Others made an effort to appear busy with their work while stealing glances whenever they thought Sarah wasn't looking. The office atmosphere, which usually hummed with the quiet efficiency of legal professionals going about their daily routines, felt charged with an undercurrent of tension and whispered conversations. Margaret Williams arrived at the office at exactly 9 o'clock, as she did every morning, carrying her leather briefcase and wearing her customary navy blue suit. Sarah watched from her desk as Margaret's eyes immediately found her across the open workspace area. The senior partner's face went through a series of expressions, starting with confusion, moving through shock, and settling into what could only be described as cold fury. Margaret set down her briefcase with more force than necessary and strode directly toward Sarah's desk, her heels clicking authoritatively against the polished hardwood floor. "Ms. Chen, I need to see you in my office immediately," Margaret said, her voice carrying the kind of controlled anger that made even senior associates nervous. "Bring your case files for the Morrison project." Sarah gathered her materials and followed Margaret through the maze of cubicles and offices that made up the associate level of the law firm. She could feel dozens of eyes tracking her movement, and she heard the subtle rustling of papers and clicking of keyboards that indicated people were pretending to work while actually paying attention to the unfolding drama. The walk to Margaret's corner office felt like a perp walk, with Sarah playing the role of the accused criminal being led to judgment. Margaret's office was a shrine to conservative legal tradition, with darkwood paneling, leather-bound legal volumes, and photographs of her shaking hands with governors, federal judges, and business leaders. The walls displayed her degrees from Columbia Law School, her bar admissions from 3 different states, and awards recognizing her contributions to corporate legal practice. It was an environment designed to intimidate and impress, and Sarah had always felt small and uncertain during her previous visits to this space. "Close the door and sit down," Margaret instructed, not bothering to look up from the legal brief she was reviewing. Sarah complied, settling into one of the stiff-backed chairs that faced Margaret's massive desk. The silence stretched for several minutes while Margaret finished reading, occasionally making notes in the margins with a gold fountain pen that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly rent. Finally, Margaret looked up, her steel-gray eyes fixed on Sarah's exposed tattoos, with an expression of barely contained disgust. "Would you care to explain what you think you're doing?" she asked, her tone suggesting that there was no explanation that would be acceptable. "In 3 years of working at this firm, you have never once appeared in the office dressed inappropriately. Today you walk in here looking like you belong in a carnival sideshow rather than a respectable, legal practice." Sarah had rehearsed this moment in her mind dozens of times over the past few months, imagining different ways she might respond when confronted about her tattoos. She had considered apologizing, making excuses about laundry problems or wardrobe malfunctions, or promising to return to her usual coverage routine. But sitting in Margaret's office, surrounded by symbols of traditional legal authority, Sarah realized that she was tired of apologizing for who she was. "I'm not doing anything different than I do every day," Sarah replied, keeping her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "I'm here to work on legal cases and represent our clients to the best of my ability. My personal appearance doesn't change my qualifications or my commitment to this firm." Margaret's eyebrows rose in surprise, as if she hadn't expected Sarah to defend herself rather than simply accept the implied criticism. "Your personal appearance is a reflection of this firm's values and standards," Margaret said, leaning forward in her chair. "When you meet with clients, when you appear in court, when you represent Morrison and Associates in any professional capacity, you are carrying our reputation with you. What do you think our clients will say when they see their legal counsel covered in tattoos like some kind of street criminal?" The comparison to a criminal stung, but Sarah forced herself to remain calm and professional. "With respect, Miss Williams, I don't think my tattoos have any bearing on my ability to practice law effectively. I've had excellent results on every case I've handled. My client satisfaction ratings are among the highest in the firm, and my research and writing skills have been consistently praised by partners and clients alike." Margaret waved her hand dismissively, as if Sarah's professional accomplishments were irrelevant to the discussion. Success in individual cases doesn't excuse poor judgment in professional presentation. "We have standards here, Chen. Standards that have served this firm well for 4 decades. Those standards exist for a reason, and they apply to everyone, regardless of their personal preferences or cultural background." The mention of cultural background felt like a deliberately provocative jab, and Sarah suspected that Margaret's objections to her tattoos were based on more than just conservative professional standards. She had noticed over the years that Margaret seemed particularly critical of associates who didn't fit the traditional mold of white, upper-class legal professionals. The few African American and Latino associates at the firm had faced similar scrutiny over their appearance, speaking patterns, and social backgrounds. I understand that the firm has certain expectations, Sarah said carefully, but I believe those expectations should be based on professional competence and ethical behavior, not personal appearance choices that don't affect job performance. My tattoos are meaningful expressions of my heritage and personal history. Asking me to hide them is asking me to hide fundamental parts of my identity. As explaining, many of those persons were taken by two of them who was approval of any kind of sensibility. Margaret's face hardened even further, and making it supported by the others. Margaret's face hardened even further, and Sarah realized that her appeal to personal identity and culture of hurt. The senior partner saw Sarah's tattoos as evidence of poor judgment and lack of respect for authority, not as meaningful cultural expressions. Mrs. Chen, let me be perfectly clear about something, Margaret said, her voice taking on the tone she typically reserved for opposing counsel during particularly contentious negotiations. This is not a democracy, and your personal identity is not our primary concern. This is a business that depends on client confidence and professional reputation. If you cannot present yourself in a manner that reflects our standards, then perhaps you would be happier working somewhere else. The threat was implicit but unmistakable. Sarah could conform to the firm's appearance expectations, or she could find herself looking for new employment. In the competitive Seattle legal market, being forced out of a prestigious firm like Morrison & Associates would be a significant career setback that could affect her prospects for years to come. But the alternative, returning to her daily routine of concealment and shame, felt like a betrayal of everything she had worked to achieve in terms of personal authenticity and self-acceptance. I need some time to consider my options, Sarah said, standing up from her chair. May I assume that you want me to return to covering my tattoos while I make that decision? Margaret's smile was cold and triumphant. I want you to return to behaving like a professional legal associate, Ms. Chen. What that means should be obvious to someone with your education and experience. Sarah left Margaret's office feeling emotionally drained but also strangely relieved. After 3 years of hiding and pretending, the central conflict of her professional life was finally out in the open. There would be no more strategic sleeve positioning, no more careful makeup application, no more anxiety about accidental exposure. Whatever happened next, at least she would face it as her authentic self. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of whispered conversations and sideways glances. Some colleagues went out of their way to avoid interacting with Sarah, while others seemed to be watching her with increased interest, as if they were waiting to see what would happen next. Michael stopped by her desk around 11 o'clock, his face a mixture of concern and embarrassment. Sarah, what are you doing? He asked in a low voice, glancing around to make sure they weren't being overheard. Everyone's talking about your tattoos. Margaret Williams looked furious when she came out of her office. Are you trying to get yourself fired? The question revealed everything Sarah needed to know about Michael's priorities and values. He wasn't concerned about her well-being or her right to express herself authentically. He was worried about how her choices might reflect on him and affect his own standing within the firm's social hierarchy. In that moment, Sarah realized that their relationship had been built on a foundation of pretense and accommodation rather than genuine acceptance and mutual respect. I'm being myself, Michael, Sarah replied. For the first time in 3 years, I'm not hiding who I am to make other people more comfortable. I thought you might understand that, but I can see that I was wrong. Michael's face reddened, and he looked around nervously to see if anyone was listening to their conversation. This isn't about being yourself, Sarah. This is about being professional and showing respect for the people you work with. Your tattoos are distracting and inappropriate for this environment. Surely you can see that. Sarah studied Michael's face, looking for any sign of the man she had fallen in love with over long nights of legal research and quiet dinners at out-of-the-way restaurants. But the person standing in front of her seemed like a stranger, someone more concerned with social conformity than with supporting the person he claimed to care about. What I can see, Sarah said quietly, is that you're embarrassed to be associated with me, now that everyone knows what I look like without long sleeves and concealer. I can see that you're more worried about what Margaret Williams thinks than about how I feel about spending 3 years hiding parts of myself that I'm proud of. Michael started to protest, but Sarah held up her hand to stop him. It's okay, Michael. I understand where your priorities are. But I need you to understand that I'm not going back to pretending to be someone I'm not just to make this easier for you or anyone else. Their conversation was interrupted by Jennifer Park, who approached with a stack of legal documents and a concerned expression. "Sarah, I hate to interrupt, but we have a problem with the Cascade Industries case. Their CEO just called and specifically requested that you be removed from their legal team. Apparently, someone told him about your tattoos, and he's concerned about how it might look to have you representing his company in negotiations." The news hit Sarah like a physical blow. Cascade Industries was one of her most important clients, a mid-sized manufacturing company that had been with the firm for over 15 years. She had been working on their legal issues for almost 2 years, developing expertise in their industry and building relationships with their executive team. The CEO, Robert Cascade, had previously praised her work and specifically requested her involvement in several high-profile cases. "Did he say who told him about my tattoos?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Jennifer glanced around nervously before responding. "He mentioned that he had lunch with Margaret Williams yesterday, and she expressed some concerns about changes in the firm's staffing on his account. She apparently suggested that he might want to consider requesting different legal representation to ensure the best possible outcome for his cases." The revelation confirmed Sarah's suspicions about Margaret's motivations and tactics. The senior partner wasn't just expressing personal disapproval of Sarah's appearance. She was actively working to undermine Sarah's client relationships and damage her reputation within the firm. It was a calculated move designed to force Sarah out of the company while making it appear as though the decision was driven by client preferences rather than discriminatory management practices. Michael looked stricken by this development, and Sarah could see him calculating how her professional troubles might affect his own career prospects. "Sarah, maybe you should talk to Margaret about this," he suggested. "Maybe there's a way to work something out, some kind of compromise that would satisfy everyone." But Sarah was no longer interested in compromise. The events of the morning had clarified her situation in ways that months of internal debate had not. She was working for a company that valued conformity over competence, appearance over ability, and tradition over talent. More importantly, she was working alongside people who were willing to sacrifice her professional relationships to maintain their own comfort with conservative social norms. The afternoon brought additional challenges as word of the Cascade Industries situation spread through the office. 2 other clients called to express concerns about their legal representation, and Sarah overheard colleagues speculating about whether she would be forced to resign or whether the partners would find a way to terminate her employment. The atmosphere of professional courtesy and mutual respect that had characterized her early years at the firm was rapidly deteriorating into something that felt more like a witch hunt. As Sarah sat at her desk reviewing case files and trying to maintain some semblance of normal work routine, she found herself thinking about her grandmother's stories about facing discrimination and prejudice as a young immigrant in 1950s America. Her grandmother had often talked about the importance of dignity and self-respect even in the face of unfair treatment and social rejection. "You cannot control how other people see you," her grandmother had said, "but you can control how you see yourself. Never let anyone make you ashamed of who you are." The wisdom of those words had never seemed more relevant or more challenging to follow. Sarah realized that she was facing a moment that would define not just her career, but her character and her commitment to the values her grandmother had tried to instill in her. She could retreat back into hiding and concealment, preserving her job but losing her self-respect. Or she could stand firm in her authentic identity, accepting whatever professional consequences might follow. By the end of her first day of appearing at work with exposed tattoos, Sarah felt emotionally exhausted but strangely liberated. The constant anxiety of potential discovery that had plagued her for 3 years was gone, replaced by a different kind of uncertainty about her professional future. As she gathered her belongings to leave the office, she noticed that the usual end-of-day conversations and social interactions seemed to flow around her, rather than including her, as if she had become invisible to her colleagues. The evening commute on Seattle's light rail system provided Sarah with time to reflect on the day's events and consider her options. She could return to work the next morning in her usual long sleeves and blazers, apologize to Margaret Williams for her poor judgment, and hope that the situation would eventually be forgotten. She could look for a new position at a more progressive law firm, though the legal community in Seattle was small enough that word of her departure from Morrison and Associates would inevitably spread. Or she could stay and fight, challenging the firm's discriminatory practices and standing up for her right to authentic self-expression in the workplace. Each option carried significant risks and potential rewards. Conforming would preserve her current income and professional status, but it would also require her to return to the daily routine of concealment and shame that had been taking an increasing toll on her mental health and personal relationships. Finding a new job would offer a fresh start and the possibility of working in a more accepting environment, but it would also mean starting over in terms of client relationships, case experience, and advancement opportunities. Fighting back appealed to her sense of justice and personal integrity, but it would likely result in a prolonged legal battle that could consume years of her life and destroy her reputation within the conservative legal establishment. Even if she ultimately won such a battle, the victory might come at such a high personal and professional cost that it would feel more like defeat than vindication. Sarah's apartment in the Capitol Hill neighborhood reflected her dual nature, with conservative professional clothing hanging next to vintage band t-shirts and hiking gear. The walls displayed her law school diploma, alongside artwork she had collected from the tattoo conventions and cultural festivals, where she felt most comfortable being herself. It was a space where she didn't have to hide or pretend, and she spent the evening researching employment law and discrimination statutes that might apply to her situation. Washington state's employment discrimination laws prohibited workplace discrimination based on race, religion, gender, and several other protected categories, but personal appearance and body art were not specifically mentioned in the statutes. Federal civil rights laws were similarly silent on the issue of tattoos and workplace discrimination. However, Sarah's legal training helped her identify potential arguments based on cultural expression and religious freedom, given that some of her tattoos reflected her Asian and Native American heritage. The next morning, Sarah made a deliberate choice to wear another short-sleeved outfit, this one revealing not just her arm tattoos but also a portion of the mountain range design that extended across her upper back. She had decided that retreating into concealment would send the wrong message to her colleagues and to herself about the legitimacy of her position and the value of her authentic identity. The reaction to her second day of visible tattoos was more subdued but no less hostile. Margaret Williams avoided direct eye contact during their brief encounter in the hallway, but Sarah could feel the senior partner's disapproval radiating across the space between them. Other colleagues seemed to have settled into a pattern of professional courtesy that maintained the necessary working relationships while making it clear that social acceptance was not forthcoming. The breakthrough in Sarah's situation came from an unexpected source. Dr. Patricia Nakamura, a prominent civil rights attorney who had been following Sarah's casework through professional publications and legal databases, called the office requesting a meeting to discuss potential representation for a high-profile discrimination lawsuit she was preparing to file against a major technology company. Dr. Nakamura had specifically asked to work with Sarah. Having been impressed by her research and argumentation in several complex employment law cases that Morrison and Associates had handled over the past 2 years, the potential client was a Japanese-American software engineer who had been passed over for promotion repeatedly despite outstanding performance reviews. And Dr. Nakamura felt that Sarah's background and expertise made her the ideal attorney to handle the case. Margaret Williams found herself in an uncomfortable position when Dr. Nakamura's office called to schedule the meeting. The case represented millions of dollars in potential fees for the firm, and Dr. Nakamura's reputation in the civil rights community meant that successful collaboration could lead to additional high-value referrals. However, assigning Sarah to such a visible case would require Margaret to publicly endorse an associate whose appearance she had been actively criticizing. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday afternoon in the firm's main conference room, the same space where Sarah had endured Margaret's pointed comments about professionalism and reputation earlier in the week. Sarah prepared extensively for the meeting, reviewing not just the legal issues involved in the case but also researching Dr. Nakamura's background, philosophy, and previous courtroom strategies. Dr. Nakamura arrived at the Morrison and Associates offices with an impressive entourage that included 2 junior attorneys, a paralegal, and a research assistant. She was a woman in her 60s with silver hair, wearing a perfectly tailored suit that somehow managed to be both professional and distinctly stylish. Sarah had expected to meet someone serious and intimidating, but Dr. Nakamura's warmth and genuine interest in people immediately put everyone in the room at ease. The introductions proceeded normally until Dr. Nakamura's eyes fell on Sarah's exposed tattoos. Instead of the disapproval or surprise that Sarah had come to expect from professional encounters, Dr. Nakamura's face lit up with interest and what appeared to be recognition. "Miss Chen, your tattoos are absolutely remarkable," Dr. Nakamura said, moving closer to examine the intricate designs on Sarah's arms. The dragon work is exquisite, and those geometric patterns look like traditional Pacific Northwest Native American designs. Are they cultural tributes? For the first time in her professional career, Sarah found herself in a situation where her tattoos were being discussed as art and cultural expression rather than evidence of poor judgment or unprofessional behavior. She explained the cultural research and artistic collaboration that had gone into each piece, the family heritage that inspired the designs, and the personal significance of the various elements. Dr. Nakamura listened intently, occasionally asking questions that demonstrated both genuine interest and impressive knowledge of Asian and Native American artistic traditions. Margaret Williams, who had been expecting to steer the conversation toward legal strategy and case logistics, found herself sitting silently as the two women discussed cultural identity, artistic expression, and the challenge of maintaining authentic heritage in professional environments that demanded conformity. Chen, I have to tell you that your willingness to honor your cultural heritage through body art tells me something very important about your character and values. Dr. Nakamura said, "The case I want to discuss involves a client who has faced discrimination partly because of his refusal to completely assimilate into corporate culture. He has maintained certain Japanese business practices and communication styles that his supervisors have criticized as unprofessional, even though these same practices have contributed to his success as an engineer. I think you would understand his situation in ways that other attorneys might not." The conversation that followed revealed the complexity and scope of the discrimination case Dr. Trussa Nakamura was preparing. Her client, Hiroshi Tanaka, was a brilliant software engineer who had been with his company for 8 years, consistently receiving excellent performance reviews and contributing to several breakthrough projects that had generated millions of dollars in revenue. However, he had been passed over for promotion 5 times, with supervisors citing concerns about his communication style and cultural fit with the company's management team. Dr. Nakamura believed that Tanaka's treatment represented a pattern of discrimination based on cultural stereotyping and bias against employees who maintained strong connections to their ethnic heritage. The case would require extensive research into employment law, cultural discrimination precedents, and corporate communication practices. More importantly, it would require an attorney who could understand and articulate the subtle ways that cultural bias manifested in professional environments. Sarah's work on the Chen versus Metroplex Industries case was brilliant. Nakamura continued, referring to a complex employment discrimination lawsuit that Sarah had researched and argued the previous year. Her legal brief on cultural expression in the workplace was cited by 3 different federal courts in subsequent cases. I believe she has the expertise and perspective necessary to represent Mr. Tanaka effectively. Margaret Williams found herself in the awkward position of having to acknowledge Sarah's professional accomplishments and expertise while continuing to maintain her disapproval of Sarah's personal appearance choices. The tension in the room was palpable as the senior partner struggled to reconcile her personal biases with the firm's financial interests and professional obligations. "Mrs. Chen is certainly a talented attorney," Margaret said carefully, "though we do have concerns about ensuring that all of our associates present themselves in ways that reflect the firm's professional standards and client expectations." Dr. Nakamura's response was swift and decisive. "Miss Williams, with all due respect, I think your concerns are misplaced. Ms. Chen's tattoos reflect a thoughtful engagement with her cultural heritage and artistic traditions. In my experience, attorneys who have faced discrimination or marginalization themselves often bring unique insights and empathy to discrimination cases. Mr. Tanaka specifically requested that we work with an attorney who would understand the challenges of maintaining cultural identity in discriminatory professional environments. The revelation that the client had specifically requested an attorney with experience facing cultural discrimination added another layer of complexity to the situation. Margaret realized that her attempts to force Sarah to conform to traditional appearance standards might actually be interfering with the firm's ability to serve certain clients effectively. The meeting concluded with an agreement for Sarah to lead the Morrison & Associates team working on the Tanaka case, with Dr. Nakamura providing strategic guidance and courtroom support as needed. The potential fees from the case, combined with the possibility of additional referrals from Dr. Nakamura's extensive professional network, made it clear that Sarah's cultural background and personal experiences were actually valuable assets rather than professional liabilities. As Dr. Nakamura prepared to leave, she pulled Sarah aside for a brief, private conversation. Ms. Chen, I want you to know that I've been following your career through professional publications and legal databases for almost 2 years. Your research and writing on employment law issues has been consistently impressive. But more than that, your perspective brings something unique to these cases. Don't let anyone convince you that your authenticity is a weakness. In the right context, it's actually your greatest professional strength. The words carried a weight and authority that came from Dr. Wemen. Nakamura's decades of experience fighting discrimination and advocating for underrepresented communities. Sarah felt a surge of validation and confidence that had been absent from her professional life for months. For the first time since revealing her tattoos, she began to envision a future where her cultural identity and personal expression could coexist with professional success and respect. The aftermath of the meeting created ripple effects throughout the Morrison & Associates office. Word spread quickly that Sarah had been specifically selected by one of the region's most prominent civil rights attorneys to lead a potentially lucrative and high-profile case. Colleagues who had been avoiding her or treating her with barely concealed disdain began to approach her with questions about the Tanaka case and expressions of interest in collaborating on research and strategy development. Michael's reaction to these developments was particularly revealing. He seemed torn between relief that Sarah's professional reputation was being rehabilitated and concern that her newfound confidence might make her less willing to compromise on appearance and behavior issues. During their conversation after the Dr. Nakamura meeting, he suggested that Sarah's success with the discrimination case might give her the credibility necessary to negotiate some middle ground with Margaret Williams regarding dress code expectations. Maybe you could agree to cover the tattoos during client meetings and court appearances, Michael suggested. You've proven your point about authenticity and cultural expression. Now you could show that you're also willing to be flexible and professional when the situation requires it. But Sarah was no longer interested in middle ground or compromise solutions that required her to hide parts of herself to make others comfortable. The meeting with Dr. Nakamura had shown her that there were professional environments where her authenticity was valued rather than merely tolerated, and she was beginning to question whether Morrison & Associates was the right place for her to build her long-term career. "Michael, I appreciate that you're trying to help," Sarah replied, "but I'm not going back to hiding who I am. If this firm can't accept me as I am, then maybe it's time for me to find a place that can." The conversation highlighted the fundamental differences in their approaches to professional identity and personal authenticity. Michael viewed compromise and adaptation as necessary survival skills in conservative professional environments, while Sarah had come to see them as forms of self-betrayal that ultimately undermined both personal integrity and professional effectiveness. As Sarah threw herself into preparing for the Tanaka case, she found renewed energy and purpose in her legal work. The case required her to research cultural discrimination precedents, interview witnesses who had experienced similar treatment, and develop legal arguments that connected employment law principles to broader issues of cultural identity and workplace inclusion. It was exactly the kind of challenging, meaningful work that had originally drawn her to the legal profession. The research phase of the case also brought Sarah into contact with a network of attorneys, academics, and activists who were working on similar issues throughout the Pacific Northwest. She attended conferences and seminars where her tattoos were viewed as symbols of cultural pride rather than professional shortcomings, and she began to build relationships with people who shared her commitment to authentic self-expression and social justice advocacy. 3 weeks into her work on the Tanaka case, Sarah received an unexpected phone call that would change everything about how her colleagues viewed her tattoos and their significance. The call came from Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, the granddaughter of the law firm's founding partner and current chair of the firm's executive committee. Morrison had been following the Tanaka case through legal news publications and had learned about Sarah's role as lead counsel through her professional network. What made the call particularly significant was Dr. Morrison's reason for reaching out. She had been researching her family's legal history and had discovered that her grandfather, the firm's founder, had represented several Japanese-American families during World War II, helping them recover property and assets that had been seized during the internment period. These cases had never been well publicized, partly because of the political sensitivity of defending Japanese Americans during wartime, and partly because her grandfather had deliberately kept a low profile about his civil rights work to protect his other clients and business interests. Dr. Morrison had been looking for an appropriate way to honor her grandfather's legacy and had been considering establishing a scholarship fund or pro bono legal clinic focused on civil rights and cultural discrimination cases. Sarah's work on the Tanaka case, combined with her obvious commitment to cultural heritage and identity issues, suggested a potential partnership that could benefit both the firm's historical legacy and its current reputation. The phone conversation lasted almost an hour, during which Dr. Morrison shared copies of legal documents, newspaper clippings, and personal correspondence that revealed the extent of her grandfather's civil rights work. The materials painted a picture of a man who had risked his professional reputation and business relationships to defend the rights of marginalized communities during one of the darkest periods in American civil rights history. Ms. Chen, I've been watching your career through our firm's internal reports and external legal publications for some time, Dr. Morrison explained. Your research and argumentation on employment discrimination cases has been consistently impressive, but more than that, your obvious commitment to cultural heritage and identity issues reminds me of the values my grandfather tried to embody in his practice. The revelation that the firm's founding partner had been a civil rights advocate created an entirely new context for Sarah's situation within Morrison and Associates. Margaret Williams's emphasis on tradition and conservative values suddenly seemed less aligned with the firm's actual historical legacy than Sarah's commitment to fighting discrimination and defending cultural expression. Dr. Morrison suggested a meeting to discuss the possibility of Sarah taking a leadership role in establishing the Morrison Civil Rights Initiative, a new division within the firm that would focus on employment discrimination, cultural rights, and social justice advocacy. The initiative would handle pro bono cases for underrepresented communities while also taking on high-profile discrimination lawsuits that could generate significant fees and positive publicity for the firm. The timing of Dr. Morrison's proposal was particularly significant because it came just as Sarah was preparing for the most challenging phase of the Tanaka case. Discovery proceedings had revealed extensive documentation of discriminatory behavior within Hiroshi Tanaka's company, including email exchanges between supervisors that contained explicitly racist comments and cultural stereotypes. The case was attracting national attention from civil rights organizations and legal advocacy groups, positioning Sarah at the center of a high-profile legal battle with implications far beyond the specific circumstances of one engineer's career. Sarah's tattoos, which had been viewed as evidence of poor judgment and unprofessional behavior just weeks earlier, were now being discussed in legal journals and civil rights publications as symbols of authentic cultural expression and resistance to workplace discrimination. The intricate dragon design on her left arm had been featured in a magazine article about Asian American legal professionals who were challenging traditional notions of professional appearance and behavior. The geometric patterns on her right shoulder had caught the attention of Native American rights organizations, who praised Sarah's respectful approach to incorporating traditional designs into contemporary body art. Several tribal attorneys had reached out to discuss potential collaboration on cases involving cultural appropriation and indigenous rights issues. Most significantly, the mountain range tattoo across Sarah's back had become a talking point in discussions about memorializing deceased family members and maintaining connections to geographical and cultural heritage. Legal professionals who had lost parents or grandparents were sharing their own stories about meaningful tattoos and jewelry that helped them feel connected to their family history and cultural traditions. Margaret Williams found herself in an increasingly untenable position as Sarah's professional reputation and media visibility continued to grow. The senior partner's attempts to marginalize Sarah and undermine her client relationships were beginning to look petty and discriminatory, particularly in light of Dr. Morrison's public support for Sarah's work and the firm's emerging commitment to civil rights advocacy. The situation reached a crisis point during a partners' meeting where Dr. Morrison presented her proposal for the Morrison Civil Rights Initiative and recommended Sarah as the founding director of the new division. Margaret Williams objected strenuously, arguing that Sarah's appearance and behavior were inconsistent with the firm's traditional values and that her tattoos would undermine the credibility of any civil rights program the firm might establish. "We cannot allow one associate's personal choices to define our public image," Margaret argued. Miss Chen may be competent in legal research and writing, but her decision to cover herself with tattoos shows a fundamental lack of judgment that makes her unsuitable for leadership positions within this firm. Dr. Morrison's response was swift and decisive. She distributed copies of the historical documents she had shared with Sarah, highlighting her grandfather's civil rights work and his willingness to challenge conventional wisdom and social prejudices in defense of his clients' rights. She pointed out that the firm's current reputation for conservative traditionalism was actually inconsistent with its founding principles and historical legacy. My grandfather understood that meaningful legal advocacy sometimes requires attorneys to challenge social conventions and stand up for unpopular principles, Dr. Morrison said. Ms. Chen's tattoos reflect her commitment to cultural heritage and personal authenticity, values that are entirely consistent with the civil rights work that built this firm's foundation. The meeting concluded with a vote of confidence in Sarah's leadership of the new civil rights initiative, but the margin was narrow enough to indicate that significant opposition remained within the firm's senior leadership. Margaret Williams and 2 other conservative partners voted against the proposal, while Dr. Morrison and 4 more progressive partners supported it. The deciding vote came from James Rodriguez, who had been impressed by Sarah's legal work but concerned about the potential for negative publicity surrounding the tattoo controversy. I believe Ms. Chen has demonstrated exceptional legal judgment and professional competence, Rodriguez said during his remarks before the vote. Her personal appearance choices may be unconventional, but they haven't interfered with her ability to represent clients effectively or maintain positive relationships with judges and opposing counsel. If anything, her authenticity and cultural awareness seem to enhance her effectiveness in discrimination cases. The establishment of the Morrison Civil Rights Initiative created immediate opportunities for Sarah to expand her practice beyond traditional employment law into areas such as housing discrimination, educational equity, and criminal justice reform. The initiative's first major case involved a class action lawsuit against a major retail chain that had been systematically excluding job applicants with visible tattoos, even for positions that involved no customer contact. The irony of Sarah leading a lawsuit challenging discrimination against people with tattoos was not lost on her colleagues at Morrison & Associates. The case required her to research the legal and social history of tattoo discrimination, interview plaintiffs who had faced employment barriers because of their body art, and develop arguments about the arbitrary nature of appearance-based hiring restrictions. During the preparation phase of the tattoo discrimination case, Sarah discovered that many of the plaintiffs had stories remarkably similar to her own. Military veterans had been denied employment because of tattoos that commemorated their service and fallen comrades. Parents had faced discrimination because of tattoos that honored deceased children or celebrated family milestones. Artists and cultural advocates had been excluded from professional opportunities because of body art that reflected their heritage and personal values. The case attracted support from unexpected sources, including several prominent business leaders who had concealed their own tattoos throughout their careers. A technology executive who had built a billion-dollar company came forward to discuss how he had hidden extensive arm tattoos for 15 years, wearing long sleeves even during summer presentations to avoid potential discrimination from investors and business partners. Sarah's media interviews about the case focused not just on legal precedents and employment law principles, but also on the broader social implications of appearance-based discrimination. She argued that workplace policies targeting tattoos often disproportionately affected military veterans, people of color, and individuals from working-class backgrounds, creating subtle but significant barriers to economic mobility and professional advancement. The attention generated by the tattoo discrimination case led to speaking invitations at law schools, civil rights conferences, and professional development seminars. Sarah found herself traveling throughout the Pacific Northwest and California, sharing her expertise on employment discrimination and cultural identity issues with audiences that included attorneys, human resources professionals, and business executives. These speaking engagements provided Sarah with opportunities to connect with other legal professionals who had faced similar challenges in balancing authentic self-expression with conservative professional expectations. She met attorneys who had struggled with decisions about natural hairstyles, religious dress, cultural jewelry, and other forms of personal expression that had been deemed unprofessional by traditional legal environments. The network of relationships Sarah built through her civil rights work began to influence the culture within Morrison & Associates itself. Young associates who had previously felt pressure to conform to rigid appearance and behavior standards began to express themselves more authentically, knowing that they had support from at least one senior colleague who understood the challenges they faced. Jennifer Park, the junior associate who had been among the first to compliment Sarah's tattoos, began wearing jewelry that reflected her Korean heritage and speaking more openly about her family's immigration story. A Latino associate started using his full name, including accent marks, in professional correspondence instead of the anglicized version he had adopted during law school. An African-American paralegal stopped straightening her hair and began wearing natural styles that reflected her personal preferences rather than conventional professional standards. These small acts of authentic self-expression created a ripple effect throughout the firm, challenging long-held assumptions about professional appearance and behavior. The changes were subtle but significant, representing a shift toward greater inclusivity and acceptance of diverse backgrounds and perspectives within the firm's culture. Michael's reaction to these developments was complex and revealing. He seemed proud of Sarah's professional success and growing reputation within the legal community, but he remained uncomfortable with the attention her tattoos received and the way they had become symbols of broader social and cultural issues. Their relationship continued to deteriorate as it became clear that he expected her to downplay her advocacy work and return to a more conventional approach to career development. "I don't understand why you're making this so political," Michael said during one of their increasingly tense conversations. "You've proven your point about acceptance and authenticity. Now you could focus on building your practice and establishing yourself as a serious legal professional without all the publicity and controversy." But Sarah had discovered that her work on civil rights and discrimination issues was not just professionally fulfilling, it was also personally meaningful in ways that traditional corporate law had never been. The opportunity to help people who had faced discrimination because of their appearance, cultural background, or personal choices felt like a natural extension of her own experiences and struggles. The Tanaka case proceeded to trial with Sarah as lead counsel, supported by Dr. Nakamura's strategic guidance and a team of research assistants and expert witnesses. The courtroom proceedings attracted significant media attention, partly because of the high-profile nature of the defendant company, and partly because of the broader implications of the case for workplace discrimination and cultural inclusion issues. Sarah's opening statement focused on the subtle but pervasive nature of cultural discrimination in professional environments. She argued that Hiroshi Tanaka's treatment reflected systematic bias against employees who maintained strong connections to their ethnic heritage, even when those connections enhanced rather than diminished their professional effectiveness. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about more than one man's career. Sarah said, her tattoos clearly visible as she gestured to emphasize her points. It's about whether American workplaces will embrace the diversity and cultural richness that make our economy strong, or whether they will continue to punish employees who refuse to hide their heritage and identity to make others comfortable. The trial testimony revealed extensive evidence of discriminatory behavior within the defendant company, but it also highlighted the ways that cultural bias manifested in subtle comments, exclusion from informal networks, and assumptions about communication styles and leadership potential. Sarah's questioning of witnesses demonstrated her deep understanding of these dynamics and her ability to help jurors recognize discrimination that might otherwise seem like ordinary workplace interactions. The trial that would ultimately define Sarah's career and transform public perception of workplace discrimination lasted 3 weeks, during which her tattoos became an unexpected focal point for discussions about authenticity, cultural expression, and professional identity. Each day, as she stood before the jury in her carefully chosen professional attire that deliberately exposed her artwork, Sarah embodied the very principles she was advocating for on behalf of Hiroshi Tanaka. The defense attorney's strategy initially focused on challenging Tanaka's performance reviews and questioning his claims of discrimination. However, as the trial progressed, it became clear that the defense team was also attempting to undermine Sarah's credibility by drawing attention to her tattoos and suggesting that her appearance reflected poor judgment that extended to her legal arguments and case preparation. During cross-examination of one of the defense's expert witnesses, the opposing counsel made a calculated comment about the importance of maintaining professional standards in workplace environments. The comment was ostensibly directed at the witness, but the attorney's eyes were fixed on Sarah's exposed tattoos as he spoke, making the subtext clear to everyone in the courtroom. Dr. Nakamura, who had been observing the proceedings from the gallery, immediately objected to the implicit attack on Sarah's appearance. Your Honor, counsel's comments appear to be directed at opposing counsel's personal appearance rather than at the witness's testimony. Such comments are inappropriate and irrelevant to the legal issues being decided in this case. Judge Patricia Chen, who happened to share Sarah's surname though they were not related, sustained the objection and issued a stern warning to the defense attorney about maintaining proper courtroom decorum. The exchange drew media attention and sparked online discussions about discrimination within the legal profession itself, with many commentators noting the irony of attorneys using appearance-based attacks in a case about workplace discrimination. The turning point in the trial came when Sarah called her surprise witness, Dr. James Morrison, the elderly son of the firm's founding partner and Dr. Elizabeth Morrison's uncle. Dr. James Morrison, now in his 80s, had been a civil rights attorney himself in the 1960s and 1970s, working alongside his father on cases involving discrimination against Asian Americans, Native Americans, and other marginalized communities. Dr. Morrison's testimony provided historical context for the current case by describing the long legacy of discrimination faced by Asian American professionals in the Pacific Northwest. He spoke about his father's courage in representing Japanese American families during World War II, despite facing criticism and economic pressure from other members of the legal community, who viewed such representation as unpatriotic or professionally damaging. My father taught me that the law is only as strong as the lawyers who are willing to defend unpopular principles and stand up for people who cannot stand up for themselves, Dr. Morrison testified. He believed that authentic advocacy required attorneys to understand discrimination from personal experience, not just from legal textbooks. The testimony resonated powerfully with the jury, particularly when Dr. Morrison turned his attention directly to Sarah and her role in continuing the family tradition of civil rights advocacy. Miss Chen's willingness to honor her cultural heritage through her appearance demonstrates the kind of authentic commitment to identity and principle that my father and grandfather valued in the attorneys they mentored and supported. The defense attorney's attempts to challenge Dr. Morrison's testimony only served to reinforce the connection between Sarah's personal authenticity and her professional effectiveness. When pressed about whether appearance standards were important in professional environments, Dr. Morrison responded with a question that became a defining moment of the trial. Counselor, are you suggesting that my father was less effective as an attorney because he chose to represent clients that other lawyers considered professionally damaging to work with? Are you arguing that Ms. Chen is less qualified to practice law because she honors her heritage in ways that make some people uncomfortable? If so, you are making exactly the kind of discriminatory judgment that brought us here today. The jury deliberated for only 6 hours before returning a verdict in favor of Hiroshi Tanaka, awarding him $2.3 million in damages for lost wages, emotional distress, and punitive compensation. More importantly for the broader legal implications of the case, the jury's findings established precedent for challenging subtle forms of cultural discrimination that had previously been difficult to prove in court. The aftermath of the successful trial created a media sensation that extended far beyond the legal community. Sarah's story became the subject of feature articles in national newspapers and magazines, highlighting how her decision to embrace authentic self-expression had initially led to professional challenges, but ultimately enhanced her effectiveness as a civil rights attorney. The coverage focused particularly on the meaning behind Sarah's tattoos and the cultural research that had informed each design. Readers learned about her grandmother's immigration story, her family's connection to Pacific Northwest Native American communities, and her personal journey toward embracing her multicultural heritage. The articles presented her tattoos not as rebellious statements or fashion choices, but as thoughtful expressions of family history and cultural pride. Margaret Williams, who had spent months attempting to marginalize Sarah and undermine her professional reputation, found herself increasingly isolated within the firm as Sarah's national recognition grew. The senior partner's objections to Sarah's appearance now appeared petty and discriminatory in light of the positive media coverage and the substantial fees generated by the civil rights cases Sarah was handling. The situation reached its conclusion during a partners' meeting 6 months after the Tanaka trial, when Dr. Elizabeth Morrison announced her decision to promote Sarah to senior associate and appoint her as the permanent director of the Morrison Civil Rights Initiative. The promotion came with a significant salary increase, expanded benefits, and the authority to hire additional staff for the growing Civil Rights Division. Margaret Williams made one final attempt to object to the promotion, arguing that Sarah's high media profile and controversial appearance might alienate traditional clients who preferred more conservative legal representation. However, her objections were overruled by a unanimous vote of the other partners, who had been convinced by the financial success and positive publicity generated by Sarah's work. Ms. Williams, I think it's time to acknowledge that our firm's strength comes from diversity of perspective and experience, not from conformity to outdated appearance standards, Dr. Morrison said during the meeting. Ms. Chen has demonstrated exceptional legal competence, brought in significant new business, and enhanced our reputation within the civil rights community. Her tattoos have become symbols of authentic advocacy rather than professional liability. The promotion ceremony, held in the same conference room where Sarah had been criticized for her appearance just months earlier, was attended by clients, colleagues, and media representatives who had been following her story. Dr. Patricia Nakamura served as the keynote speaker, praising Sarah's courage in maintaining her authentic identity despite professional pressure, and highlighting the broader implications of her success for other attorneys facing similar challenges. Sarah's story reminds us that authentic advocacy requires authentic advocates, Dr. Nakamura said during her remarks. Her willingness to honor her heritage and express her identity has not weakened her professional effectiveness. It has strengthened it by connecting her more deeply to the communities and principles she serves. The ceremony also marked the announcement of several new initiatives within the Morrison Civil Rights Division, including a scholarship program for law students from underrepresented communities and a pro bono clinic focusing on appearance-based discrimination cases. Sarah's success had created opportunities not just for her own career advancement, but for systemic changes that would benefit future generations of attorneys who might face similar challenges. Michael's reaction to Sarah's promotion and growing success was the final indicator of the fundamental incompatibility between their values and life goals. Rather than celebrating her achievements, he expressed concern about the continued media attention and suggested that she consider transitioning back to more traditional legal work, now that she had established her point about acceptance and authenticity. Their relationship ended amicably but definitively, with both recognizing that they had different visions of what professional success and personal fulfillment should look like. Michael remained at Morrison & Associates, focusing on corporate law and maintaining the kind of conservative professional image that he believed was essential for long-term career success. Sarah wished him well, but she no longer had any interest in hiding parts of herself to accommodate others' comfort levels or social expectations. 1 year after her promotion, Sarah was invited to speak at Harvard Law School's commencement ceremony, sharing her story with graduates who were preparing to enter legal careers in an increasingly diverse and rapidly changing professional landscape. Her speech focused on the importance of authentic advocacy and the ways that personal experiences with discrimination or marginalization could enhance rather than diminish professional effectiveness. "Your authenticity is not a barrier to professional success," Sarah told the graduating class, her tattoos clearly visible in the photographs that would later appear in alumni publications and legal journals. "It is a source of strength, insight, and connection that will make you more effective advocates for justice and equality. Do not allow others to convince you that you must choose between being true to yourself and being successful in your career." The speech was widely quoted and shared on social media, becoming a rallying cry for young attorneys who were struggling with decisions about authentic self-expression in conservative professional environments. Sarah received hundreds of messages from law students and young attorneys who had been inspired by her story to embrace their own cultural heritage, personal values, and authentic identities. The Morrison Civil Rights Initiative continued to grow under Sarah's leadership, taking on increasingly complex and high-profile cases involving workplace discrimination, cultural rights, and social justice issues. The division's success attracted talented attorneys from around the country who wanted to work in an environment where professional competence was valued more highly than conformity to traditional appearance standards. Sarah's tattoos, which had once been hidden beneath long sleeves and concealer, became symbols of the broader changes taking place within the legal profession and American society more generally. Legal publications began featuring articles about the growing acceptance of diverse appearance choices within professional environments, and several bar associations revised their dress codes to be more inclusive of cultural expression and personal authenticity. The transformation in Sarah's professional life was matched by changes in her personal relationships and social connections. She began dating Elena Rodriguez, a documentary filmmaker who was working on a project about workplace discrimination and cultural identity in professional environments. Elena's appreciation for Sarah's artwork and cultural heritage created the foundation for a relationship built on mutual respect and authentic self-expression. Their relationship developed against the backdrop of Sarah's growing involvement in civil rights advocacy and social justice activism. Elena's work documenting stories of discrimination and resilience complemented Sarah's legal advocacy, creating opportunities for collaboration that strengthened both their professional and personal connections. 5 years after her first day of appearing at work with visible tattoos, Sarah stood in the same office building where she had once hidden fundamental parts of her identity to maintain professional acceptance. But now she occupied the corner office that had once belonged to Margaret Williams, who had retired early after becoming increasingly isolated within the firm's changing culture. The walls of Sarah's office displayed her law school diploma, alongside artwork from the tattoo artists who had created her body art, photographs from civil rights conferences and community events, and thank you letters from clients whose lives had been changed by the legal advocacy her division provided. It was a space that reflected both professional achievement and authentic personal expression, demonstrating that the two were not mutually exclusive. As Sarah prepared for another high-profile discrimination case, this one involving a teacher who had been fired for wearing traditional African jewelry to work, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The decision to stop hiding her tattoos had initially seemed like a risky act of rebellion against professional authority, but it had ultimately become the foundation for a career that was more meaningful, more successful, and more personally fulfilling than anything she could have achieved while pretending to be someone else. The story of Sarah's tattoos had become more than just one person's struggle for acceptance and authenticity. It had become a symbol of the broader changes taking place in American workplaces, where diversity and inclusion were increasingly recognized as sources of strength rather than threats to traditional values. Her success had opened doors for countless others who had faced similar choices between conformity and authenticity, proving that professional excellence and personal expression could not only coexist, but could actually enhance each other in powerful and meaningful ways. Looking back on the whispered criticisms and social exclusion she had faced during her early years at Morrison & Associates, Sarah realized that the colleagues who had mocked her ink had ultimately done her a favor. Their discrimination had forced her to confront fundamental questions about identity, authenticity, and professional values that had led to discoveries about herself and her capabilities that might never have emerged in a more comfortable or accepting environment. The tattoos that had once been sources of shame and anxiety had become symbols of pride, cultural connection, and professional distinction. They told the story not just of her personal journey, but of the broader transformation of American professional culture toward greater acceptance of diversity, authenticity, and the rich cultural heritage that makes the legal profession stronger and more effective in serving justice for all people.